My name is Daisy, and I'm 27 years old. I still remember the day my parents told me I should give up my education so my brothers could have theirs. It was during my junior year of college, a time that should have been filled with hope and possibilities. Instead, I was faced with an impossible choice that would change the course of my life forever. Being disowned by my own family left a wound that took years to heal. But sometimes, life has a way of coming full circle. When I landed that university position, suddenly, the family that had written me off wanted back in. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever had to choose between your dreams and family obligations, hit that like and subscribe button before I tell you my story. I grew up in a quiet, middle-class suburban neighborhood in Michigan, the kind with neat lawns and mailboxes all in a row. My parents, Thomas and Margaret, worked hard to provide for our family of 6. Dad was a manager at a manufacturing plant, while Mom worked as an administrative assistant at the local high school. Money wasn't abundant, but we never went without necessities. Still, I often noticed the worry lines deepening on my parents' faces when bills arrived, or the hushed conversations about finances after we kids went to bed. As the eldest of 4 children, I naturally fell into the role of second caretaker. My twin brothers Kyle and Kevin were 4 years younger than me, rambunctious boys who seemed to exist in their own special universe. My sister Amanda, 6 years my junior, was the quiet one, always observing everything with her thoughtful eyes. From an early age, I helped with homework, made lunches, and kept an eye on my siblings while my parents worked. It wasn't something they explicitly demanded, but rather an unspoken expectation that I accepted without question. School came naturally to me. I loved learning the satisfaction of solving problems, the worlds that opened up through books. My teachers often told my parents I had a bright future ahead. I dreamed of becoming a professor someday, inspired by a particularly engaging history teacher in 8th grade who made the past come alive through her stories. When I shared this dream with my parents, they smiled and nodded, telling me I could be anything I set my mind to. Throughout high school, I maintained a perfect GPA while working weekends at the local grocery store. Every dollar I earned went into a savings account labeled college fund. My parents were proud of my work ethic, often using me as an example when my siblings complained about chores or schoolwork. "Be more like Daisy," they'd say. "She knows what it takes to succeed." The summer before my senior year, I received news that changed everything. I had won a partial scholarship to State University based on my academic achievements. My parents threw a small celebration dinner, inviting grandparents and a few close friends. Dad made a toast, his voice thick with emotion. "To Daisy, the first in our family to go to college. You've made us so proud." That fall, however, the manufacturing plant where Dad worked announced downsizing measures. He wasn't laid off, but his hours were cut, and the promise of overtime that had helped supplement our family income disappeared. Mom took on a second job working evenings at a local department store, coming home exhausted, but determined to keep our family afloat. Despite these challenges, I started college with optimism. The partial scholarship covered about half of my tuition, and my savings helped with books and supplies. I lived at home to save on housing costs and continued working part-time now at the campus bookstore. The commute was long, nearly an hour each way, but I told myself it was temporary. Education was my ticket to a better future. My first 2 years of college passed in a blur of lectures, essays, late-night study sessions, and early morning shifts. I rarely had time for the social aspects of college life, but I didn't mind. My professors recognized my dedication, and I was building relationships that would serve me well later. By my sophomore year, I had been accepted into the honors program in my major and was already thinking about graduate school applications. As my academic achievements grew, so did the financial strain at home. The twins were now in high school, talking about their own college plans. Kyle wanted to study engineering, while Kevin had his sights set on computer science. Both fields that promised good careers, but also required expensive educations. Amanda, though only a sophomore in high school, was already showing talent in science and mathematics. When I brought up my plans for graduate school during a family dinner, I noticed my parents exchange a look I couldn't quite interpret. Dad changed the subject quickly, asking about an upcoming exam instead. It struck me as odd, but I was too busy to dwell on it. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to that moment, the first hint that our family's paths might not align as I had always assumed they would. That summer, I took on extra hours at work, even picking up shifts at a local restaurant to boost my savings. Mom commented that I was working too hard and should enjoy my youth. When I reminded her that education was expensive and I wanted to be prepared for graduate school, she became unusually quiet. "You know, Daisy," she said after a long pause, "sometimes life doesn't go exactly according to plan. Sometimes we have to adjust our expectations." At the time, I thought she was just sharing general life wisdom. I had no idea she was preparing me for a conversation that would shatter our family forever. The fall semester of my junior year was my most challenging yet. I had taken on a heavier course load to ensure I could graduate on time, and my honors thesis required extensive research. I was exhausted, but fulfilled, feeling closer than ever to my goals. When winter break arrived, I looked forward to some rest, though I had lined up temporary holiday work to add to my savings. Little did I know that this winter break would be the dividing line in my life. The moment when everything I thought I knew about family loyalty and sacrifice would be turned upside down, forcing me to make choices I never imagined facing at 20 years old. The confrontation that changed everything happened during our family dinner on the third day of winter break. Mom had prepared my favorite meal, pot roast with roasted vegetables and homemade rolls. At the time, I thought it was a welcome home gesture. Now I realize it was more like a last meal before an execution. The dinner started normally enough. We passed dishes around. The twins dominated the conversation, with stories about their high school antics, and Amanda quietly observed as usual. Dad seemed particularly interested in my college experience, asking detailed questions about my classes and professors. "So the twins have been looking at colleges," Mom mentioned casually as she served apple pie for dessert. "They've got their hearts set on Brighton Tech for engineering and computer science." I nodded encouragingly. "That's a great school. Competitive programs, though." "They both have the grades," Dad said proudly. "And with their extracurriculars, they stand a good chance of getting in." "That's wonderful," I replied. "Have you looked into scholarship options? Brighton is pretty expensive." The awkward silence that followed should have warned me. Mom and Dad exchanged another one of those looks that had become increasingly common. "Actually," Dad said, clearing his throat, "we need to talk about some financial restructuring for the family." The way he said restructuring, like we were a failing business instead of a family, sent a chill through me. I put down my fork and waited. Mom jumped in. "We've been doing a lot of calculations, honey. With the twins both wanting to go to Brighton and Amanda not far behind them, we're looking at some significant educational expenses over the next few years." "I understand," I said. "College is expensive. That's why I've been working so hard and saving. Maybe the twins could look into community college for the first 2 years. That's what my friend Jessica did, and she's transferring to state next semester with no debt so far." Dad shook his head dismissively. "Community college won't provide the connections they need in their fields. Brighton has industry partnerships, internship placements. For what they want to do, they need to start there." "Well," I suggested, "there are always student loans. I know they're not ideal, but with degrees in engineering and computer science, they'd be able to pay them off fairly quickly." "We've thought about all that," Mom said, her voice strangely firm. "And we've come up with a solution that makes the most sense for the family as a whole." The twins were suddenly very interested in their dessert, avoiding eye contact. Amanda was watching me with wide, concerned eyes. Whatever was coming, she already knew, and from her expression, I wasn't going to like it. Dad took a deep breath. We think you should take a break from college. You've had 2.5 years already, which is more education than your mother or I ever had. You could use your college fund to help the twins get started, and with a full-time job, you could contribute to the household expenses. The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. I stared at my father, waiting for the punchline to what had to be a terrible joke. But his expression remained serious, expectant, even as if he had just proposed a perfectly reasonable plan. You want me to drop out? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. After everything I've worked for, I'm in the honors program. I'm on track for graduate school. Graduate school was always a bit ambitious, Mom said gently, as if breaking news of a terminal diagnosis. And let's be practical. The boys have more promising career prospects. Engineering and computer science degrees practically guarantee good jobs right out of college. And what about my career prospects? I asked, my shock turning to anger. What about my dreams? You could always go back someday, Dad said vaguely. When the family's financial situation improves, or take night classes while working. Plenty of people do that. So my education is dispensable, but theirs isn't. I looked at the twins who had the decency to look uncomfortable. Why aren't we having this conversation about all of us making sacrifices? Why am I the only one being asked to give up my future? You're the oldest, Mom said, as if that explained everything. And you've always been responsible, always put family first. This is different, I insisted. You're not asking me to babysit or help with homework. You're asking me to give up my entire future. The conversation devolved from there. Voices were raised, tears were shed. The twins escaped to their room as soon as they could, while Amanda stayed silent but present. I suggested alternative after alternative. Part-time school for me, community college for the twins, additional student loans, postponing college for a year or two for all of us to save more. Each suggestion was shot down. Dad became increasingly frustrated with what he called my selfishness. Mom alternated between appealing to my sense of family duty and expressing disappointment in my resistance. We're not asking, Dad finally said after hours of circular arguments. We're telling you how it's going to be. The family needs this from you. I went to bed that night in a state of shock, unable to process what had happened. The next morning, I tried to talk to the twins about it, but they awkwardly avoided the conversation, mumbling about how they hadn't asked for any of this. Only Amanda sought me out, slipping into my room and sitting on my bed. It's not right what they're asking, she whispered. But they've been planning this for months. I heard them talking. The knowledge that this wasn't a spontaneous decision, that my parents had calculated the value of my education against my brother's, and found mine wanting cut deeper than anything. The next few days were a cold war in our house. I researched frantically, looking for scholarships, grants, loan options, anything that could help me stay in school without my parents' support. The financial aid office was closed for the holiday, leaving me in limbo. Mom and Dad acted as if the matter was settled already, talking about which local businesses were hiring full-time. Finally, 3 days before I was due to return for spring semester, Dad issued his ultimatum over breakfast. We need to know your decision today, he said. If you insist on going back to school, we can no longer support you in any way. Not tuition, not housing, when you come home for breaks, not staying on our health insurance. Nothing. You'd really cut me off completely, I asked, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay strong. Over this, you're the one making the choice, Mom said, her voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. If you choose yourself over your family, that's on you. In that moment, I saw my parents clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as the supportive, loving figures of my childhood, but as people willing to sacrifice one child's future for the others. People who saw my dreams as less valuable, my ambitions as expendable. Then I guess I have no choice. I said quietly. I'm going back to school. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's face hardened while Mom turned away, wiping a tear that seemed more angry than sad. Then you should pack your things, Dad said finally. You're no longer welcome in this house. I spent that day in a daze packing everything I could fit into my car. Clothes books, mementos. The practical side of my brain was already calculating how long my savings would last, where I could live, how I would survive. Amanda helped me pack, slipping her own saved allowance money into my bag when she thought I wasn't looking. As I carried the last box to my car, the family stood in the doorway watching. The twins looked confused, as if they couldn't quite believe things had gone this far. Amanda was openly crying. Mom stood with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Only Dad spoke. You've chosen yourself over your family, he said coldly. Don't come back until you're ready to apologize and do what's right. I drove away from my childhood home with tears blurring my vision, but also with a strange, steely determination forming in my core. I would find a way to survive this. I would finish my education. And I would never again allow anyone to tell me my dreams were worth less than someone else's. When I arrived back at campus 3 days before the spring semester began, the reality of my situation hit me full force. I had planned to move back home after this semester to save money, so I had no housing arranged. The residence halls were closed until the weekend before classes started, and even if they were open, I couldn't afford on-campus housing without financial aid adjustments. My carefully saved money wouldn't stretch to cover both tuition and rent for long. With nowhere else to go, I spent that first night in my car in the campus parking garage, huddled under blankets as January temperatures dropped below freezing. The next morning, I washed up in the gym facilities, which were open limited hours during break, and headed straight to the financial aid office when it opened. There I met Sandra, an older woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude who would become one of my most important lifelines. When I explained my situation, trying to hold back tears and maintain some dignity, she didn't offer pity. Instead, she offered solutions. This happens more than you'd think, she said, pulling up my file on her computer. Parents pulling financial support mid-degree. It's particularly tough mid-academic year. Let's see what we can do. For the next 2 hours, Sandra worked through options with me. She helped me fill out paperwork to update my FAFSA to independent status, though she warned the process could take months. She identified emergency grants I could apply for and connected me with the student housing office about potential openings. They're looking for another resident assistant in the sophomore dorms, she told me. The previous student graduated early. It's not ideal for a junior, but it would give you housing and a small stipend. I can put in a word. By the end of that day, I had an interview for the RA position, applications for emergency financial aid, and a temporary spot in a hostel that partnered with the university for students in crisis. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. The next week was a blur of interviews, applications, and orientation for my new role as an emergency replacement RA. The position came with a single room in a sophomore dormitory, a meal plan, and a modest stipend. It also came with significant responsibilities, from enforcing quiet hours to being on call for student emergencies. I would essentially be working for my housing while taking a full course load. That was just the beginning. To cover tuition, I increased my hours at the campus bookstore, particularly during the rush periods at the start of the semester. I also took on a tutoring position through the Academic Success Center and weekend shifts waitressing at a restaurant near campus. Between the 3 jobs, I was working well over 30 hours a week while taking 16 credits of upper-level courses. My carefully constructed academic schedule began to show cracks under the pressure. For the first time, I received less than an A on a major assignment. I fell asleep during a lecture after working a late restaurant shift. The honors thesis that had been my pride and joy became another looming deadline in an impossible schedule. Worse than the physical exhaustion was the emotional isolation. I checked my phone constantly during those first weeks, some part of me expecting my parents to call to say they'd reconsidered, that they hadn't really meant to cut me off entirely. That call never came. Instead, I discovered they had blocked me on social media, the digital equivalent of slamming a door in my face. The only family connection I maintained was with Amanda, who texted me from a friend's phone since she wasn't allowed to contact me from her own. Through her, I learned that the twins had both been accepted to Brighton Tech with partial scholarships. My parents were taking out a second mortgage on the house to cover what the scholarships didn't. The irony that they were willing to go into debt rather than consider less expensive options or allow me to continue my education wasn't lost on me. As January turned to February and February to March, the reality of my situation settled in. This wasn't a temporary family spat. My parents had made their choice, valuing my brother's education over mine, and I was truly on my own. The knowledge brought both grief and a strange sort of clarity. There was no safety net, no backup plan. My success or failure rested entirely on my own shoulders. Spring break came, bringing another painful milestone. While other students packed for beach trips or headed home to see family, I remained in the near-empty dormitory, picking up extra shifts at the restaurant since the campus jobs slowed during breaks. The halls echoed with an absence that mirrored the hole in my life where my family had been. It was during this lonely break that I began to form what would become my chosen family. A small group of international students who couldn't travel home over the short break invited me to join their dinner one night. We cooked together in the dorm kitchen, sharing stories and food from their home countries. They didn't pry when I said vaguely that I couldn't go home for break, but their simple inclusion was a balm to my wounded spirit. Another significant relationship formed with Professor Jackson, who taught my advanced research methods seminar. He noticed my dropping grades and asked me to stay after class one day. "You're one of the most promising students I've had in years," he said directly. "But something's happened. Your work is suffering. Are you all right?" Perhaps it was his genuine concern, or perhaps I had simply reached my breaking point, but I found myself telling him everything. The ultimatum, the disowning, the struggle to stay afloat. Instead of pity, he offered practical support. An extension on my major paper, information about departmental scholarships, and most valuable of all, his mentorship. He began meeting with me weekly, helping me narrow my honors thesis to something manageable given my new circumstances and providing guidance on graduate school applications. "Your parents are wrong," he said during one of our meetings. "Your academic potential is extraordinary. Giving up now would be a tragedy, not just for you, but for the field." Despite these new supportive relationships, my mental health deteriorated as the semester progressed. I lost weight I couldn't afford to lose. Sleep became a luxury rather than a necessity. Anxiety attacks struck without warning, leaving me gasping for breath in bathroom stalls between classes. Finally, at Professor Jackson's urging, I visited the campus counseling center. The counselor, Dr. Martinez, created a safe space where I could finally express the full extent of my pain. In her office, I broke down completely sobbing, as I hadn't allowed myself to do since the night I drove away from home. "They threw me away," I choked out. "Like I meant nothing. Like all my work, all my dreams were worthless compared to my brother's." "What happened says nothing about your worth," she replied gently, "and everything about their limitations. You deserved better, Daisy." That simple validation was the first step in a long healing process. Through weekly sessions with Dr. Martinez, I began to process my grief and anger to rebuild my sense of self-worth, separate from my family's valuation. Most importantly, I reconnected with my passion for learning, remembering why I had fought so hard to stay in school in the first place. The semester ended with my grades lower than my personal standards, but still respectable given the circumstances. More importantly, I had survived. I had kept my housing, my scholarships, and my place in the honors program. I had built a support network and taken steps toward healing. As summer approached, bringing with it a new set of challenges, I clung to a growing sense that despite everything, I would find my way forward. My final semester of junior year ended with a sense of exhausted accomplishment. I hadn't just survived, I'd laid the groundwork for my future independence. The summer brought both challenges and opportunities. Without classes, my campus jobs reduced hours, but I secured full-time work at the restaurant and picked up occasional catering gigs. Housing remained an issue until Professor Jackson connected me with a graduate student seeking a summer subletter at a reduced rate. As the summer progressed, I found myself approaching my senior year with renewed determination. The initial shock and pain of my family's betrayal hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something else, a fierce resolve to prove my worth, if only to myself. When fall registration opened, I met with Professor Jackson to plan my final year. He had become more than just an academic advisor. He was a true mentor who believed in me when my own family hadn't. "You should consider applying for graduate programs this fall," he said as we reviewed my course selections. "Your GPA took a hit last semester, but your overall record is still strong, and I'd be happy to write you a recommendation." "I don't know if I can afford graduate school," I admitted. "I'm barely making it through undergrad." "Most doctoral programs in our field offer full funding," he explained. "Tuition waiver plus stipend in exchange for teaching or research assistantships. It's not a fortune, but it's a living wage." The possibility rekindled a dream I'd nearly abandoned. That evening, I researched graduate programs, making lists of application requirements and deadlines. For the first time in months, I felt genuine excitement about my future. The application process became my focus alongside my coursework. Personal statements, writing samples, GRE preparations. Each step required time I barely had, but I carved out hours between shifts and classes, often working late into the night. Professor Jackson reviewed my materials, offering invaluable feedback. Meanwhile, my final undergraduate courses challenged and engaged me intellectually in ways that reminded me why I'd fought so hard to stay in school. My honors thesis was taking shape, examining changing narratives in historical archives. The work was meaningful and fulfilling, confirming my desire to pursue academia as a career. In late November, I received my first acceptance letter to a graduate program complete with a teaching assistantship that would cover tuition and provide a modest stipend. I stood in the campus mailroom, staring at the letter through tears. It wasn't just an acceptance, it was validation. Someone believed I had something valuable to contribute to my field. More acceptances followed through the winter months. By spring, I had options for the next phase of my education. I chose a program with a strong reputation in my specialty area and a supportive departmental culture. The decision brought both excitement and relief. For the first time since being disowned, I had a clear path forward. As graduation approached, I faced another emotional hurdle. Where other students ordered extra commencement tickets for extended family, I had no one to invite. My chosen family stepped in once again. My international student friends, Professor Jackson Sandra from Financial Aid, and even Dr. Martinez made plans to attend. They organized a small celebration dinner afterward, their gift to replace the family celebration I wouldn't have. The day before graduation, I received an unexpected text from Amanda. "Congrats, big sis. I'm so proud of you. Wish I could be there." It was the first direct contact I'd had with her in weeks, our secret communications necessarily limited to protect her from our parents' disapproval. I replied immediately, "Thank you. That means everything to me." "Mom and Dad told everyone you abandoned the family," she continued after a pause. "I tried to say that wasn't true, but they got mad. The twins don't really understand what happened." The revelation hurt but didn't surprise me. Of course, my parents would reshape the narrative to cast themselves as the victims rather than acknowledge what they'd done. Graduation day arrived sunny and warm. As I donned my cap and gown in my dorm room, I allowed myself a moment of pride. Despite everything, I had made it. The ceremony passed in a blur of emotions. When they called my name and I walked across the stage, I heard cheers from the small group who had become my true support system. At the celebration dinner afterward, Professor Jackson raised a toast to Daisy, who has shown extraordinary resilience and determination. The academic world is better for having you in it. The summer after graduation marked my transition to graduate school. I moved to a new city, started a teaching assistantship, and began doctoral coursework. The fresh start was exactly what I needed. For the first time, I was building a life completely on my own terms, free from both family expectations and the immediate trauma of their rejection. Graduate school presented its own challenges, but they were ones I embraced. The teaching component of my assistantship revealed an unexpected passion. Standing in front of a classroom of undergraduates, guiding their understanding of historical concepts, I found a sense of purpose that transcended my personal struggles. Professor Jackson remained a mentor from afar, checking in regularly and continuing to offer guidance. When he invited me to collaborate on a research paper during my second semester, I jumped at the opportunity. The resulting article, published in a respected journal, added significant weight to my growing academic resume. My social circle expanded as I formed connections with fellow graduate students and faculty in my department. These relationships were built on shared intellectual interests and mutual respect, a stark contrast to the conditional love I'd experienced from my family. For the first time, I was valued for my mind and character rather than my usefulness or willingness to sacrifice. Occasional updates from Amanda kept me tenuously connected to my biological family. The twins had completed their first year at Brighton Tech with decent grades. My parents were struggling with the financial burden but remained committed to their education. No one mentioned my absence at family gatherings or holiday celebrations. It was as if I had been erased, my existence acknowledged only in Amanda's secret communications. The pain of this erasure lessened over time, aided by regular sessions with a therapist in my new city. Through this work, I began to recognize the unhealthy dynamics that had shaped my family relationships. The expectation that I would always put others' needs before my own. The different standards applied to me versus my brothers. The conditional nature of my parents' love. "You're not responsible for their choices," my therapist reminded me often. "And you don't have to earn the right to pursue your dreams." These insights fueled both personal growth and academic success. I threw myself into my studies with a clarity of purpose born from hardship. By the end of my first year, I had distinguished myself as a promising scholar and effective teacher. My faculty advisors took notice, including me in research projects and departmental initiatives. As I completed my master's degree and transitioned into the doctoral phase of my program, I felt more secure in my identity and path than ever before. The frightened, heartbroken girl who had slept in her car that cold January night seemed like a different person. In her place stood a woman who had discovered her own strength, who had built a life from the ashes of rejection, who was beginning to make her mark on her field. What I didn't realize then was that this hard-won stability would soon be tested. The family that had discarded me would attempt to re-enter my life, not with apologies or recognition of their wrong, but with new demands and expectations. And I would face another choice, whether to allow them back in and on what terms. 3 years into my doctoral program, my academic career was flourishing in ways I couldn't have imagined during those dark days after being disowned. I had completed all required coursework with distinction, passed my comprehensive exams, and begun dissertation research on evolving interpretations of primary source documents in historical narratives. My teaching evaluations consistently ranked among the department's highest, and I had presented at several prestigious conferences. The spring semester brought unexpected recognition. The department selected my dissertation proposal for a competitive research grant, which included funds for archive visits and a reduced teaching load. The university newspaper ran a feature on grant recipients, including a brief profile of my work and academic journey. I thought nothing of the local coverage until my phone buzzed with a text from Amanda, now a sophomore in college herself. "Mom saw your article in the university paper. She mentioned you at dinner last night. First time in years." My heart raced as I read her message. After nearly 4 years of silence, my name had been spoken in my childhood home. I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me wanted to dismiss it entirely to protect myself from reopening old wounds. Another part, a part I wasn't entirely comfortable acknowledging, hungered for any recognition from the family that had cast me aside. "What did she say?" I texted back. "Just that she saw your picture that you're working on your doctorate." Dad changed the subject fast. A week later, my phone displayed a number I still knew by heart, but hadn't seen on my screen in years, my mother's. My finger hovered over the answer button as conflicting emotions warred within me. Curiosity won out. "Hello." My voice sounded strained even to my own ears. "Daisy, it's Mom." She spoke as if we'd talked last week, not as if years of silence stretched between us. "How are you?" The surreal normalcy of her tone left me momentarily speechless. "I'm fine," I finally managed. "Why are you calling? Can't a mother check on her daughter?" The false brightness in her voice set my teeth on edge. "We saw your picture in the paper. You look well. A doctorate, that's impressive." The conversation continued in this strange, surface-level way. Mom asked about my research in terms that made it clear she didn't really understand or care about the details. She mentioned the weather, her garden, mundane aspects of life that didn't touch on the gaping wound between us. Not once did she acknowledge what they had done, the years of silence, the ultimatum that had severed our family. Then she mentioned the twins. The boys graduated in May, both with honors. They're working now, entry-level positions at good companies. "That's nice," I said, unsure what response she expected. "Of course, with the job market what it is, they're not making quite what we'd hoped, and the student loans are substantial. Brighton was expensive even with scholarships and the second mortgage." There it was, the real reason for her call emerging in hints and implications. Financial strain. The very thing they had disowned me to avoid, they had willingly taken on for my brothers. And now it seemed they were feeling the consequences. The call ended awkwardly, with Mom suggesting we catch up properly sometime. I agreed, non-committally, too confused by the interaction to do otherwise. As soon as we hung up, I called my therapist and scheduled an emergency session. "She didn't apologize," I said, pacing the therapist's office the next day. "Not one word about what they did, how they cut me off completely. It's like those years never happened." "What do you think she wants?" my therapist asked. "Money," I replied without hesitation. "They're struggling with the twin student loans, and now that I'm Dr. Daisy with a university position..." I trailed off, the pieces falling into place. 2 days later, a text arrived from my father, the first communication from him since the day he told me not to come back without an apology. "Your mother and I would like to see you. Dinner, next time you're in town." I showed the message to my closest friend, a fellow doctoral candidate who knew my family history. "Are you going to go?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants answers, closure maybe. Another part thinks it's just opening myself up to more hurt." After much deliberation and another session with my therapist focused on establishing healthy boundaries, I agreed to meet my parents. Not at their home, which carried too many painful memories, but at a neutral restaurant halfway between my current city and my hometown. The weeks leading up to the dinner were filled with anxiety. I rehearsed what I might say, how I would respond to various scenarios. My therapist helped me develop strategies for maintaining boundaries and managing emotional triggers. By the time the dinner date arrived, I felt as prepared as I could be, though my stomach knotted with tension as I drove to the restaurant. My entire family was there when I arrived. Not just my parents, but the twins and Amanda as well. Seeing them all together, sitting at a table as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't been cut out of family photos and holidays for years, was jarring. Amanda rushed to hug me, whispering, "I'm glad you're here," in my ear. The twins offered awkward greetings while my parents rose with stiff smiles. The dinner began with forced pleasantries and careful avoidance of anything substantive. My father asked about my teaching job, reducing my academic position to its most basic element. My mother commented repeatedly on how grown up I looked, as if I were returning from a semester abroad, rather than years of enforced absence. Gradually, as the main course arrived, the conversation turned to the twins' jobs, their struggles with student loan payments, the difficulty of finding affordable housing in their city. My father mentioned the strain of the second mortgage, the unexpected medical bills from my mother's minor surgery last year. The financial difficulties piled up in the narrative, each one a not-so-subtle hint. The twins seemed largely oblivious to the subtext, genuinely excited to tell me about their lives and careers. Amanda watched everything with knowing eyes, occasionally shooting me sympathetic glances. My mother grew increasingly anxious as dessert approached, and no offer of assistance had been forthcoming from me. Finally, as we waited for the check, my father cleared his throat. "Your mother and I are proud of what you've accomplished, Daisy. A university position at your age is impressive." "Thank you," I said, waiting for what would come next. "We've been having some financial difficulties," he continued, confirming my suspicions, "with the boys' education costs and some unexpected expenses. We were hoping, since you're doing so well now, you might be able to help out. Just until we get back on our feet." The restaurant seemed to fade away as I stared at my father. After everything, after disowning me, blocking me, telling relatives I had abandoned the family, they now expected me to help them financially. The audacity was breathtaking. I left the dinner feeling emotionally drained, but also strangely calm. I had maintained my boundaries, neither committing to helping nor burning bridges completely. The twins had seemed surprised by the financial request, suggesting they might not know the full story of our estrangement. Amanda had hugged me tightly before I left, promising to call soon. The next morning, my mother called. "About last night," she began without preamble. "We were hoping you'd be more understanding of our situation. We need help with the mortgage payment this month." In that moment, I realized this wasn't about reconnection at all. It wasn't about healing our relationship or acknowledging past wrongs. It was about what I could give them, just as it had always been. "I need to think about it," I said, and ended the call. That evening, I made a decision. I would have one final, honest conversation with my parents. Not about money, but about the past, the pain, and the possibility of any future relationship. It would be on my terms, in a setting where I felt safe enough to speak my truth. And depending on how they responded, I would decide whether they deserved any place in my life going forward. The meeting I arranged with my parents took place at their house the following weekend. I chose their home deliberately, wanting them to feel comfortable, but also needing to reclaim that space in some way, to enter as an adult with agency, rather than the heartbroken young woman who had been forced to leave years before. I requested that the twins be present as well. It was time they understood what had really happened. Amanda knew the truth already and had agreed to be there for moral support. I arrived early afternoon, steeling myself as I walked up the familiar path to the front door. The house looked smaller somehow, though little had changed. The same faded welcome mat, the same brass knocker, the same potted plants flanking the steps. I hesitated before knocking, taking deep breaths as my therapist had taught me. This was about closure and truth, regardless of how they responded. Dad answered awkwardly, welcoming me inside. The family was gathered in the living room, an uncomfortable tableau of forced casualness. Mom perched on the edge of her favorite armchair. The twins sprawled on the couch, looking confused about why this meeting required their presence. Amanda sat in the window seat, giving me a small, encouraging nod. "Thank you for coming," Dad began formally. About our discussion at dinner. I'm not here to talk about money. I interrupted, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm here to talk about what happened 4 years ago because I don't think everyone in this room knows the truth. Mom shifted uncomfortably. Daisy, I don't think this is necessary. The past is the past. The past is why we haven't spoken in 4 years, I replied. The past is why I missed holidays and birthdays and graduations. The past is why we're sitting here now, strangers to each other. So yes, it is necessary. I turned to the twins who were watching with growing concern. Do you know why I left home during my junior year? Why I wasn't at your high school graduation or your college acceptance celebrations? Kyle glanced at our parents. Dad said you chose to move out, that you wanted independence. And later, Kevin added, that you were too busy with your own life to stay in touch. That's not what happened, I said quietly. I was told to drop out of college to help pay for your education. When I refused, I was disowned and told not to come back. The shock on their faces confirmed they had never known the truth. Amanda reached over and squeezed Kevin's shoulder as he turned to stare at our parents in disbelief. That can't be right, Kyle said. They wouldn't do that. It is right, Amanda confirmed. I was there. They said the family couldn't afford all of us in college, and since Daisy was the oldest and a girl, she should sacrifice her education for yours. Because your engineering and computer science degrees were considered more valuable than my history degree, I added, looking directly at my parents. Because my dreams were deemed dispensable. Mom's face had gone pale. Dad's jaw was tight, his eyes darting between the twins and me. Is this true? Kevin asked them. Did you really ask Daisy to drop out for us? We did what we thought was best for the family as a whole, Dad said defensively. Resources were limited. Choices had to be made. So you chose us over her, Kyle said slowly, the reality sinking in. And never told us. You were disowned. Kevin turned to me, horror dawning in his eyes. That's why you were never here. Not because you abandoned us, but because they kicked you out. I slept in my car that first night back at campus, I said, my voice catching, despite my resolve to stay composed. I had to scramble for emergency housing take on 3 jobs while carrying a full course load. I lost my health insurance, my safety net, my family, all because I wanted to finish my degree. The room fell silent as the twins processed this information. Amanda moved to sit beside me, a quiet show of solidarity. Why are you bringing this up now? Mom finally asked, her voice small. To punish us, to turn the boys against us. I'm bringing it up because you contacted me after years of silence, not to apologize or make amends, but to ask for money, I replied. And because healing can't happen without truth. The twins deserve to know what really happened. We were trying to be practical, Dad insisted, though, with less conviction than before. Brighton was expensive. We took out loans, a second mortgage. We did what we had to do. You chose to take on that debt, I pointed out. You decided their education was worth it. That was your right as parents. What wasn't your right was to demand I sacrifice my future instead of considering less expensive options for everyone. Kyle had buried his face in his hands. We could have gone to state or community college first. I had no idea this was happening. You shouldn't have had to know, I assured him. This wasn't your fault. It was a decision made by Mom and Dad. But we benefited from it, Kevin said, looking up with tears in his eyes. We got the expensive education while you struggled. Again, not your fault, I said firmly. You didn't ask for this. Amanda, who had remained mostly quiet, finally spoke up. I watched all of this happen. I saw how they treated Daisy, how they rewrote the story afterward. I couldn't say anything because I was still living here, still dependent. But it was wrong. It was deeply wrong. Mom began to cry, though whether from genuine remorse or from being exposed, I couldn't tell. Dad sat rigid, his expression a mixture of anger and shame. I didn't come here today for an apology, though one would be appropriate, I continued. I came to establish some truths and boundaries. I've built a good life for myself despite what happened. I have a career I love, friends who support me, and a future I'm excited about. If you want to be part of that future in any way, things need to change. What do you want from us? Dad asked, his voice tight. Acknowledgement of what happened. No more rewriting history or pretending the past doesn't exist. No more financial requests. I'm willing to have a relationship with my siblings if they want that, independent of my relationship with you two. I turned to the twins. I missed years of your lives, and that hurts. But we're adults now. We can choose to know each other going forward if you want that. Kyle nodded immediately. Kevin wiped his eyes and did the same. As for you, I said, facing my parents again, I'll consider a limited relationship if you demonstrate genuine understanding of the harm you caused and respect for my boundaries. But I will never again allow my worth to be determined by what I can give or sacrifice for this family. I stood feeling lighter than I had in years. The truth had been spoken. The power dynamic had shifted. Whatever happened next would be on my terms, not theirs. I should go, I said. You all have a lot to process. Amanda has my number if you want to reach me. As I walked to the door, Kyle and Kevin both rose to follow me. Wait, Kyle said as we reached the porch. We had no idea. I'm so sorry. We would never have agreed to this if we'd known, Kevin added, his expression pained. All these years thinking you just didn't care enough to stay in touch. I know, I assured them, and I don't blame you, but now you know the truth, and we can start from here if you want to. We exchanged phone numbers before I left, a small but significant step toward building adult relationships separate from our parents' influence. As I drove away, I felt no triumph or vindication, only a peaceful certainty that I had done what needed to be done. The weight of unspoken truths had lifted, leaving room for whatever might come next. Back in my apartment that evening, I received a flurry of texts from the twins asking questions about my life, sharing details of theirs, beginning to bridge the years of separation. Amanda called to tell me how proud she was of my courage. They're really shaken, she reported. Dad hasn't said much, but Mom's been crying on and off all evening. I didn't want to hurt them, I admitted, but the truth needed to be spoken. It absolutely did, she agreed. And for what it's worth, I'm looking into transferring to your university for graduate school. The biology department has a program that aligns with my interests. I'd love to have you closer, I said, smiling at the prospect of rebuilding at least one family relationship fully. In the days that followed, I refocused on my academic work, finding renewed purpose in my teaching and research. The confrontation had been draining but necessary, a step toward genuine healing, rather than the superficial reconciliation my parents had attempted. A week later, I received an email from my father. It wasn't the full acknowledgement I had hoped for, but it contained something I hadn't expected: a simple, "We were wrong." Not an explanation or justification, just an admission. It wasn't enough to erase years of pain, but it was a beginning. The relationships with my siblings developed slowly over the following months. The twins and I established a regular video chat schedule, gradually getting to know each other as adults. Amanda applied and was accepted to the biology graduate program at my university, planning to start the following fall. My parents remained on the periphery, occasional texts or brief calls that remained somewhat strained but free of financial requests. I maintained firm boundaries, engaging only when I felt emotionally prepared to do so. The process wasn't linear with steps forward and back, but it was movement nonetheless. As my professional life flourished, I found unexpected fulfillment in mentoring first-generation college students facing family pressures similar to what I had experienced. My own journey gave me insight into their struggles, and I became an advocate for expanded support services for students in crisis. When the university announced a new scholarship program for students facing family financial hardship, I was asked to serve on the selection committee. It felt like coming full circle, using my painful experience to help others navigate similar challenges. The media coverage of the initiative brought unexpected attention to my story, which I shared selectively, emphasizing resilience rather than resentment. This newfound purpose, combined with continued therapy and the support of my chosen family, brought a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. The wounded young woman who had driven away from home that winter day had not just survived, but transformed, finding strength and wisdom through adversity. 1 year after the confrontation that had cleared the air with my family, my life had found a new equilibrium. I was now Dr. Daisy, officially having defended my dissertation and accepted a tenure-track assistant professor position at the same university. The academic journey that my parents had tried to cut short had culminated in a career I loved, teaching students and conducting research that felt meaningful and important. My relationship with my parents had evolved into something I could manage emotionally. We spoke occasionally, usually brief surface-level conversations. They had respected my boundaries about financial assistance, though I suspected this was more from pride than understanding. The acknowledgement of wrongdoing remained minimal, but I had accepted that full accountability might never come. What mattered was that I no longer needed their validation or approval to feel whole. My relationships with my siblings, on the other hand, had blossomed. Amanda had moved to my city to begin her graduate program, and we had weekly sister dinners, rebuilding the closeness we'd had before the rift. The twins visited several times, eager to know me as their sister, rather than the absent figure they'd been told had abandoned them. Kyle had even asked my advice about managing his student loan debt, a conversation that would have been impossible before the truth came out. "It's crazy how much they're charging in interest," he complained during one of our video calls. "I'm barely making a dent in the principal." "Have you looked into income-based repayment plans?" I asked, helping him research options. It was ironic using my financial knowledge to help my brother with the very education that had been prioritized over mine, but I found I didn't mind. The fault had never been with my siblings, only with the parents who had made impossible choices. My personal life had expanded beyond family connections. I had developed deep friendships with colleagues in my department and maintained relationships with mentors who had supported me through difficult times. Professor Jackson, now retired, still met me for coffee monthly to discuss research and academic politics. I had also met Patrick, another young professor in the English department, whose kindness and respect for boundaries made him safe to let into my life. Our relationship was still new but promising in its healthy communication and mutual support. He understood my complicated family situation without judgment, having navigated his own challenging family dynamics. My professional recognition continued to grow. The teaching award I'd received my first year as an assistant professor had opened doors to curriculum development committees and student mentorship programs. My research was gaining traction in my field, with invitations to speak at conferences and contribute to edited volumes. Perhaps most fulfilling was the scholarship fund I had helped establish for students facing family financial crises. Working with the University Foundation, I had secured initial funding and developed selection criteria that recognized the unique challenges of students cut off from family support. The first recipients had been selected, their stories echoing aspects of my own experience, but with crucial support now available. The local media coverage of the scholarship program led to a feature article that caught the attention of a national education reporter. The resulting profile focused on resilience in academia and brought unexpected attention to the issue of family financial abandonment of college students. I received emails from students across the country sharing similar experiences, reinforcing the importance of the work. One Tuesday afternoon, as I was preparing for class, my office phone rang. It was my father. "I read the article about your scholarship program," he said after an awkward greeting. "It's good what you're doing." "Thank you," I replied, unsure where the conversation was heading. "It made me think about what we did," he continued, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. You didn't deserve that. No student does. It wasn't a full apology, but it was more acknowledgement than I had ever expected. For my father, a man who prided himself on being right, it represented significant growth. No, they don't, I agreed. That's why the scholarship exists. I've been talking to the twins about it, he said. They're still upset with us. Amanda, too. Things aren't good at home. I waited, sensing he wanted something, but unsure what. I don't expect you to forgive us, he finally said. But I wanted you to know. I understand better now what we did. It was wrong. After we hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time processing the conversation. It wasn't the dramatic reconciliation scene from a movie with tears and hugs and all hurts healed. It was messy and incomplete like most real human interactions, but it was something. A recognition of harm done, a step toward truth. That evening, as Amanda and I prepared dinner in my apartment, I told her about the call. He's been different lately, she confirmed. More subdued. Mom, too. I think the article really affected them seeing your story out there for everyone to read. I never named them in the interview, I pointed out. It wasn't about public shame. Maybe not, but it forced them to see the consequences of their actions through others' eyes, she suggested. And the twins haven't let them forget it either. Kevin called the next day to tell me he had made his first donation to the scholarship fund. It's not much, he said, but I want to be part of the solution, not the problem. Kyle followed suit, adding, Maybe someday when I'm more financially stable, I can endow a scholarship in your name. Their support touched me deeply. They had taken the painful truth and turned it into positive action, finding their own way to acknowledge what had happened without remaining stuck in guilt. My mother reached out the following week asking if I would be willing to meet for coffee next time I visited Amanda. Just the two of us, she said. There are things I need to say to you face to face. I agreed with cautious optimism. Whatever came from that conversation, I knew I was strong enough to handle it. The frightened young woman sleeping in her car was now a distant memory replaced by someone who had built a life of meaning and purpose from the ashes of rejection. As I prepared for my afternoon class, I paused to look at the framed photo on my desk. It wasn't a family portrait, but a group picture from my dissertation defense. My committee members, fellow graduate students, and friends surrounded me as I held up my approved dissertation faces alight with shared joy. Professor Jackson stood beside me, pride evident in his expression. Amanda had traveled to be there, beaming from the front row. This was the family I had created. People who valued me for who I was, not what I could give or sacrifice. People who had chosen to be in my life and whom I had chosen in return. That choice made all the difference. I gathered my lecture notes thinking about the students waiting in my classroom. Some of them might be facing their own impossible choices, their own family pressures. If my story and my presence could help even one of them find their path, then everything I had endured had greater purpose. The path forward wasn't perfect or complete. Relationships would continue to evolve, some healing more fully than others. But I had learned the most valuable lesson of all: my worth was inherent, not dependent on others' validation. My dreams mattered. My education mattered. And most importantly, I mattered exactly as I was. Have you ever had to choose between your own future and what your family expected of you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of overcoming family challenges. And if you know someone who might be facing similar pressures, share this video with them so they know they're not alone. Remember that your dreams are worth fighting for, even when the people who should support you the most try to hold you back. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you the courage to stand firm in your own worth, whatever challenges you might face.